Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Talking is Sandile Zungu, the president of the Black Business Council. I want to firstly acknowledge my co-panelists who are in their own rights eminent leaders of organized business formations who have all contributed to the work that we are delivering today. The details will be covered by Martin Kingston when he makes a presentation. There's no question about it that as South Africa, we are at a cusp, and our next move will determine whether we assume our rightful place as far as our forebears will have determined, or we disintegrate into an abyss and condemn ourselves. That is an option for us. The novel coronavirus creates an unprecedented opportunity for all of us to reimagine our future as a nation state and our forte as business, mainly in the economy. And in the last couple of months, what we've done is to sit among ourselves, debate, have a conversation about what choices do we have and who are the other stakeholders. We believe that as a social partner, as business, we are a dependable social partner who, at the best of times, have come to the party, not only to assist ourselves, to assist society and to assist government. The most classical example is the Solidarity Fund. Therefore, when we make suggestions that South Africa needs to assume a new trajectory to reconstruct itself, do so with all humility, but with single-mindedness, that such choices have to be made. Some of them are very, very difficult, and all on government to do the right thing. So with those few words, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Sipho Pijana, the President of Business Unit of South Africa, his few remarks. Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, President. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me at the outset applaud Business for South Africa for such fantastic work. When we initiated this, we envisaged establishing a body that would be agile, enabling the amassing and coming together of the vast and the length and breadth of business across the board. We are in the middle of very unique times. And therefore urgent and considered responses required to ensure that we reposition our country to not only survive, but to emerge from this challenge that we face as a nation and rebuild our economy and our country. For it is the first time in the history of our country that business offers an unambiguously united response to any issue. It is a response that seeks to address an agenda for a nation and not just business, and hence Business for South Africa. We are absolutely clear. If this nation fails, so will business be doomed. And therefore our focus is on inclusive growth and not just about creating opportunities for the advancement of business. And so business and joint society on a journey to navigate our way out of this crisis. We're unequivocal about defending and deepening economic gains of democracy, including decent work for our workers and progressive labor market frameworks that have been created in the past. Also clear that inclusive growth is about broadening Black participation and women participation in the economy, as it will become clear in the presentation.
Sorry, what Monday? I did say it's okay for him to come on Monday.
Can you hear me?
President,
Yes,
we
we
can
can.
hear
Please go
you, but
ahead.
I think someone is not on mute. Can everyone else please put their phones on mute? You can carry on, President.
It is important to note that as a country, we're in a very bad place. GDP decline this year will be between 8 and 10% as a result, not only of the impact of COVID-19, but also of a failure to grasp the initiative and deal with structural inadequacies in our economy. We're likely to see an over 100% debt by 2023, from where we were in 2008 at 26%. We're likely to have in this fiscal year a budget deficit of 13.3%. An increasing number of businesses are failing, with many being liquidated, alarming levels of job losses and retrenchment. But it is possible to change and take a new direction. The fork that we are facing is one where we should make the right choice. The low road and the high road, as we describe them. Low road is one that will see us give up and indeed witness the reversal of the gains since 1994. The high road is one that requires decisive leadership and urgent action. And business's vision is predicated on a high road, and a high road that is possible. We think that it is possible to increase GDP to $1 trillion within a fixed period of time. 5% growth in GDP over the next period of 10 years annually. 1.5 million jobs being created, and 100 billion annual increase in revenue is possible. These proposals that we're going to be sharing with you will indicate how we think this is possible. Clearly, this will have to be funded. After all, our estimation is that this to reset the economy will cost about 3.4 trillion rand. And indeed, we're clear that it is not possible to get all of this from the fiscus, nor is it possible to get it from a wide range of other domestic sources. Even if we were to take into account a possibility of monetary measures being introduced by South African Reserve Bank. So clearly we need to think creatively as to how we find resources to fund our vision. We believe that of the 10 trillion US dollar in the international market, it should be possible for South Africa to position itself to attract that investment to enable us to effect the changes that we propose. So the purpose of our framework document, it is in fact a call to action. It is to urge that it is urgent that we have decisive leadership. It is a call for social compact. This set of proposals are the views and opinions of business. We are under no illusion that there are many other views out there. It is important that we forge unity and stop pointing fingers at each other. We urge in this proposal, as part of driving this agenda, that we should establish a presidential reconstruction and investment task team, a body that will have social partners work with government, and in the same way that we did, focusing on driving the minimum wage agenda, leading to agreements between the parties, in the same way that we focused in driving the agenda to effect the decisions around the job summit. We've seen ourselves focusing on these things and delivering good results. That moment has come, so we urge our leadership to establish this structure, which would have various substructures and entities that focus at various sectors. This battle can be won, and it better be and enable us to secure a better future for all of us. Thank you very much. I'm happy to hand over to Martin.
Thank you very much, Sipho, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I know that we started late, so we're not going to cut the call off at 11 o'clock if there are questions that should still be answered. Thank you both, Sandile and Sipho, for having set the scene. I think everybody on this call is familiar with Business to South Africa. It was launched effectively some 4 months ago when COVID-19 arrived in South Africa. And this is the product of the work that we've done across the business community by leveraging all of the inputs at the same time as we've been engaging on the health response and the labor market response that you're also well aware of. If we can please turn to the first slide. Thank you, Sipho. As you know, we face a fork in the road. Sipho has referred to it, and we believe that the crisis presents an opportunity for us as society to rethink the future of the country. To do that, we need to move from the metrics that we have seen in 2020 to ambitious targets some 10 years out, and we can only do that if we work together as social partners in building the economy and tackling poverty, inequality, and unemployment that has been massively exacerbated by COVID-19. To do that, we need a compelling and a stable environment which will attract investment and that will drive both growth and employment. And we believe that in that context, the restoration of both consumer and business confidence is absolutely critical if we're going to accelerate growth in the economy and both protect and add jobs. And we believe that the business community has got a critical role to play in working alongside social partners in accessing and mobilizing capital, both domestically and internationally, implementing what we characterize as national projects, and growing the tax base to strengthen the fiscus. Most importantly, we need to build a bridge to recovery beyond COVID-19, recognizing that it's likely to be with us for the foreseeable future, and certainly in our calculations, we've anticipated the balance of 2020 and 2021. And to do that, we need an ambiguous and a compelling narrative, which is focused on inclusive growth and investment to actually mobilize the capital that I have referred to. If we can move to the next slide. In doing that, we need to work together, and the theme of our approach is indeed that it is in partnership with government, with labor, and with civil society. If we're going to tackle the constraints and the challenges that have confronted us historically, that we've been unable to deal with, and if we're going to be able to deliver inclusive and accelerated economic growth. On the left-hand side of the slide, we have identified those key factors that we believe are necessary if we're going to be able to put in place that recovery strategy. From a new social and economic compact focused on inclusive growth, through infrastructure investment, unlocking sector opportunities, recognizing that we are now operating in a new global paradigm. Every single one of our trading and investment partners is also beset with the challenges of COVID-19. In the center of the slide, we identify those issues that we have failed comprehensively to address over the past 25 years, be it policy certainty, the capacity of the state, addressing the issues of inequality, transformation, and broad-based Black economic empowerment, dealing with inefficient and redundant state-owned enterprises, ensuring that our education outcomes enable innovation and entrepreneurship to come to the fore, and decisively addressing the issue of corruption and crime. And to drive change, we believe that we need to massively increase the ease of doing business, as well as driving up through the competitiveness rankings globally. We need to accelerate economic transformation, particularly sustainable, broad-based Black economic empowerment and gender equality. We need to mobilize the full might of small and medium-sized enterprises, agree on national projects, as I said, and ensure that there is effective and timely implementation of all of these initiatives via appropriately capacitated resources drawn from society at large. And at all times, we need to maintain fiscal discipline, which is key to reducing the cost of capital and the terms and conditions on which we can access that capital. Next slide, please. I believe that we are all familiar with the impact of COVID-19 on both lives and livelihoods, the 30% decline that we've seen in GDP in Q2 alone. We estimate 1 million jobs have already been lost in the formal economy, as many in the informal economy, and that we have one opportunity, and it is now, it is the silver lining, to be able to work together with decisive leadership to urgently deliver on those promises that have been made but not seen through in the years gone by, and to build a better country for all of us with a shared national vision which can focus on both inclusive growth and on job creation. Lesego, if we can go to the next slide, please. The next slide shows South African Reserve Bank statistics, their economic analysis. The Business for South Africa analysis coincides almost entirely with this, demonstrates the drop I've mentioned in both GDP growth and total employment, the impact of the lockdown during Q2 in a number of key sectors of the economy, and the fact that recovery is going to take time and off a much lower base. In fact, we estimate that it's going to take approximately 3 years for us to recover to the pre-COVID levels of real GDP. If we do not implement the changes that we are talking to, indeed, it will take even longer than that. We estimate 5 years or beyond. We are effectively in the last chance saloon. If we move, please, Lesego, to the next slide. We've set out here key metrics that we believe not only investors, but rating agencies, the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and indeed many of us commentators apply in assessing the health of the South African economy. From the size of the economy, our debt to GDP ratio, our credit rating, through to the amount of foreign direct investment, the tax revenue that's been mobilizing, the exchange rate, and most importantly, the levels of unemployment. Here on this slide, of course, we demonstrate the narrow unemployment and the Gini coefficient. And what we've seen is that despite the progress that we made in the early years as we emerged post-democracy in 1994, the years of stagnation from 2008 to 19 when we stumbled, and then, of course, COVID-19, which has effectively unraveled much of the progress we had made over the past 25 years, and where all of the metrics concerned have declined radically. And we now need to arrest that decline and embrace a much more accelerated growth path, which, as we say here, will require strategic choices and courageous and bold leadership. If we can go to the next slide, please. There are three metrics that we have used on this following slide, which demonstrate that to mobilize the capital that is required to fund all of these issues and to be able to encourage the levels of confidence that are required both for consumers and for investors, we need to deal with the total factor productivity, which has declined, as we can see, consistently and progressively over the past 20 years. And on the right-hand side of this slide, the factors that have been identified by the World Bank in the Ease of Doing Business and by the World Economic Forum in their Global Competitiveness Report. I will not bother to rehearse the factors on the right-hand side. Suffice to say that we're familiar with them all. We've inadequately addressed them, and we need to deal with them as a matter of urgency. If we can please move then to the next slide. As SIPO has indicated, broad-based Black economic empowerment is absolutely central to our proposition. We are of the view that the legislation and regulations that have been put in place to date has not delivered on the transformational intent of empowerment, and this represents not only an opportunity but a fundamental necessity for us to address that by ensuring that we can implement a transformation culture in business, ensure that we simplify policy and ensure that it is aligned and consistent wherever possible, and in particular that it is an enabler rather than a constraint on advancing the interests of small and medium-sized enterprises, many of whom have been disadvantaged to date by the policies in place because they've not been applied appropriately and comprehensively. And that in this context, we ensure the full and equitable participation by a broad base of previously disadvantaged South Africans in all aspects of the society, with a particular emphasis on those that are most disadvantaged, as we said here, women, the youth, disabled, the rural, and the poor. And that we need to ensure that we implement a substance over form approach, focusing on interventions to build social cohesion and ensure a transformation culture within business and indeed across society. If we can move, please, to the next slide. We believe that the crisis actually presents us with specific opportunities which we can take advantage of. First and foremost, as we've indicated, a new social and economic compact that is focused on inclusive growth and where we can build on the momentum and the cooperation that's been established during the current crisis. Having launched the infrastructure symposium, that we now accelerate the implementation of infrastructure that we recognize is a cornerstone of economic activity and the prospect for sustainable growth, that we unlock opportunities across sectors, take advantage of the digital economy, and acknowledge the new global paradigm I referred to at the outset. But we need to be honest about the constraints that have faced us to date and the challenges to such growth, including, and I'll highlight some, the incapacity of the state, failing to deal comprehensively with corruption and crime, ensuring that we have fit-for-purpose state-owned enterprises, and those that are not, we take off the government balance sheet, that we have policy certainty, not only with respect to BE, but with respect to all other aspects of policy, and that critically we focus on education outcomes and putting in place a health and wellness system which can support society in a way that is manifestly not capable of doing currently. Can we please go to the next slide? We think that all stakeholders, and business is a critical stakeholder in this equation, need to partner across key areas. This is a complex page. I'm just going to highlight the iterative steps that we have identified on this page. The first is focusing on key sectors and enablers for recovery that have a disproportionate impact, that we develop and implement strategies to scale. We revisit, as I said, policy and regulatory inhibitors, ensure that we can leverage off the scope for trade and exports, particularly to the balance of the continent, that we align with the government on the new role of state organs and state-owned enterprises, as well as with labor on a conducive regulatory environment. And we recognize that all of us have a role to play, particularly the state, providing overall guidance on the economic trajectory for the country and an enabling environment in the context of policy certainty and consistency, and business in sourcing capital domestically and internationally, investing in projects and creating sustainable and broadly based jobs across the country. It is only by doing this that we are of the view that we can ensure shared prosperity for the country at large, addressing poverty, inequality, and unemployment. If we can go to the next slide, please. So with that in mind, we assembled a team of industry experts. There was broad participation across all of these sectors, from business nationally and locally, small and large, but led by sector specialists in all cases, focusing, as I've indicated, on those sectors and projects that had the strongest possible multiplier effect on both jobs and growth, whilst at the same time identifying the challenges that would constrain or inhibit both investment and actions that were necessary to accelerate that growth and job creation. Acknowledging at the same time that funding key projects would be critical given the limited capital that is available, that I will refer to in due course, and the reduced levels of foreign investment support. Acknowledging, as I said, that many of our trading and investment partners are now consumed with their own COVID-19 related health, economic and societal challenges. We can go to the next slide. This is page 12. So we looked at every industry sector and high impact industry focus areas, particularly those with strong multipliers that could be quickly scaled. At the center of this slide, you can see that we looked at the current impact for each and every one of these focus areas. There are 11 that we've highlighted. And then the growth potential, particularly in terms of their impact on the market, on exports, GDP, employment, and structural benefit. And those impact industry focus areas covered SMMEs, which are clearly multi-sectoral, as well as wholesale and retail, equally so multi-sectoral. And then 9 others you can see on this slide, from energy and water and mining, the resources areas, through industrial, to services and support, agriculture, financial services, through to telecommunications, tourism and leisure. Each and every one of these has got detailed plans in terms of the constraints and challenges, the opportunities, and the resources that need to be mobilized, as well as cross-cutting themes, policies, and issues that need to be holistically addressed. If we can please go to the next slide. So in that context, for each sector, as I said, we looked at the objectives, short, medium, and long term, the key challenges, the priority actions, and we have designed a roadmap and plan for each of those sectors. Leveraging off work that has already been performed, Business to South Africa is clearly committed to a view that there is no point or purpose in replication or duplication. So, as I said, harnessing activities that have taken place, in particular on this slide, slide number 13, the work that has been performed since the Job Summit, which looked at critical enablers and activators of employment, acknowledging that the work that we have been doing as a social partner on the Job Summit needed to be realigned in the context of COVID-19. And then looking at a number of other initiatives, policies and plans that have emerged over the past 10 and 15 years, from the National Development Plan through to most recently the supplementary budget review. And in all cases on the right-hand side of this slide, for each sector, but across sectors, identifying priorities that are cross-cutting, from policy consistency and regulatory reform through to the issue of crime and corruption, the network industries, optimizing state-owned enterprises, through to economic transformation and broad-based Black economic empowerment, and modernization of the economy. We can go to the next slide, please. In that context, we recognize that despite the fact that multiple priorities have been identified for each sector and for each cross-cutting theme and issue, we needed to limit them, and we needed to ruthlessly prioritize, and we would advocate the same will apply to our social partners and the collectivity of us as we try and address and implement some of these proposals. So on the left-hand side, we have 12 so-called projects and initiatives across the network industries, energy, security, and the just transition, through transport and logistics and ICT. The agricultural sector, enhanced localization and access to plants on an inclusive and lowest cost of capital basis. At the same time, as on the right-hand side, identifying policy focus areas where we needed both certainty and they can contribute to inclusive growth. Many of these I've already mentioned, but I would highlight the mobilization of large-scale infrastructure projects, clarity on land reform, addressing the issues of education and skills development, ensuring that the labor relations environment is appropriate. That doesn't mean reform in an aggressive way. It means aligning it to our current circumstances, and then looking at simplification of regulation wherever possible. We can go to the next slide. We recognized that much of this work is time-consuming, and the results will only emerge in the medium term, and we don't have the ability to do that. We need to create an immediate uplift in the levels of consumer and business confidence. So at the same time, we identified those actions that we believe can be taken immediately and which require no policy changes. There are 15 listed on this page. Again, I'd just like to highlight a few. The first is the need for a zero-based reconstruction budget, which we will see being tabled in mid-October in the context of the medium-term budget policy statement. And we believe that is the window of opportunity that is available to us in South Africa to demonstrate these changes, to ensure that we have implemented a new social compact and we can demonstrate in the spirit of solidarity that we can work together with social partners in ensuring that there are not just decisions but aggressive and effective implementation. The second is with respect to SMMEs, ensuring that they're paid, that they have access to finance, and that we can mobilize immediately the requisite mentorship and support programs, that we can revitalize the South African construction industry, in particular in the context of sustainable development of infrastructure, that we increasingly localize, particularly in the context of COVID-19. And there is therefore now a program that has been launched under our auspices to look at localization across all sectors, that we can maximize the terms on which finance is available through public-private partnerships. We can complete the spectrum auction and re-energize digital migration. And in all of these cases, that we capacitate accordingly from across a society, drawing on resources, experience, and expertise within not only the public and private sector, but our social partners more broadly. If we can go to the next slide, please. The biggest single constraint that we find, of course, is the current economic prospects and the fiscal constraints under which we are operating. We already entered the crisis with a recession at our back, exaggerated by the downgrades to sub-investment grade, and COVID-19 has significantly amplified, as we've indicated here, the outlook for GDP. SIPO indicated that we think that it will be between 8.8 and 10% contraction for 2020 alone, as well as higher budget deficits and debt to GDP levels. We estimate the aggregate funding for the public and private sector, in other words, for South Africa, will be some 3.4 trillion rand over the next 3 years, of which 2.4 trillion, including SOEs, is in the public sector. And that the current and traditional sources of funding, including from within South Africa, is inadequate to be able to provide the support that we require. And in that context, we're going to have to access alternative and other sources of capital in competition with other emerging markets confronted with exactly the same challenges as ourselves. And that if we're going to implement infrastructure projects that are clearly a cornerstone of economic activity, as I said, then we're going to have to demonstrate fiscal discipline, regulatory certainty, and market stability. And what we cannot do is carry on along the current trajectory of unsustainable government finances with a cost of capital which would render all of these projects unviable and unsustainable. And we can only access this capital by working collaboratively, the public and private sector, but also with our other social partners. The next slide, please. So in our modeling, and our model is in fact almost identical to the National Treasury model and the Reserve Bank model. We have gone into detailed comparisons with them. As I indicated, we have an expected contraction of about 10% for the current fiscal year, growing off that lower base by approximately 4% in the subsequent 2 or 3 years. And that in itself is based upon some very aggressive assumptions that we have zero-based budgeting, that most expenditure items grow at a slower level than inflation, that there is indeed a constant reduction in the real wage bill for government over the entire period, and that there's a reduction in the funding requirement both of local government and SOEs with enhanced efficiencies in the public sector at all levels, from local government through SOEs to national government. On the right-hand side of the slide, we indicate the 2.4 trillion of national funding requirements you'll see in 2022, 2023. But we're only going to be able to recover as I said at the outset, to pre-COVID levels of real GDP within 3 years if we take all of these steps, failing which we think it could be 5 years or beyond, and major warning signs are already in place in terms of the size of the budget deficit remaining above 13%, and debt continuing to accelerate to levels where it is actually incapable of being serviced, as Minister Mboweni said. Then we will have a true financial and debt crisis. We go to the next slide, please. We are of the view that as a country, we need to work together now to ensure this accelerated economic recovery and shared national vision. We've wasted an enormous amount of both time and resources over the last decade. I'm sure many of you will say that we've identified issues that have been long identified. The problem is that almost none of them have been comprehensively and decisively, let alone effectively addressed. And we need to work in all areas on ensuring that we operate in the national interest, not just in narrow specific interest areas. To do that, we need bold and courageous leadership, and we need to capacitate the requisite teams and support that SIPO was referring to at the outset, combining both public and private sector expertise. And we've indicated to our social partners at NEDLAC, as well as directly to government and to Labour, that is exactly what we are intending and proposing that we should do. If we can go then to the last slide before we take questions. We have suggested, and again, both Sandile and SIPO refer to this, that in the current circumstances, we have one last opportunity if we're going to be able to achieve our potential in the foreseeable future. That is that we focus on key areas in terms of sectors, policies, funding options, and stabilizing the fiscus. And to do that, that we harmonize and integrate various processes that are working within the country already under the auspices of an economic reconstruction, growth, and inclusivity plan, which we would suggest be overseen by the President himself, and that we would support it in ensuring that we can, as quickly as possible, mobilize the requisite resources, as I indicated, in the window that's available to us before the medium-term budget policy statement, to enhance the levels of both consumer and investor confidence that's required, and demonstrate that as social partners we can actually achieve a new inclusive economic future for the country. Thank you very much. I'll now hand back to Timothy and Cass.
Thank you very much, Martin. We now have an opportunity for questions and answers. You can submit your questions in writing through the webcast window, which you'll see to the bottom left of your screens. We will try and deal with as many questions as we can. Please could you indicate if there's anyone specifically you'd like to address the question to. If not, I will allocate the questions, and members of the group can also, of course, add their answers as we progress. I see at the moment we have one question. We'll start off with that while the rest of you gather your thoughts. It's from Lamise. Has Business for South Africa consulted with government on the recovery plan, and is B4SA confident there's political will to implement such a plan? Martin, I think I can safely address that question to you.
Yes, the answer is that we've had extensive consultation led by SIPO and Sandile with government since COVID-19 arrived in South Africa. We have regularly consulted with them both bilaterally as well as in the context of NEDLAC. They are fully aware of the documentation that we have shared this morning. In fact, we've had substantive engagements with them already. We would hope that we would now be able to progress from that into a more detailed discussion about how we can operationalize this set of inputs that we have given alongside others that are coming from other social partners at the same time.
Thank you, Martin. There's a follow-up question, quite a long one in multiple parts from Rob Rose. I'm just going to read that out. It goes into a little bit more detail. Firstly, have you presented to key policymakers and is there support from government? Rob's saying that there's little use in having ideas if the policymakers don't buy into it. And as you point out, we've already had the NDP and many of these ideas have been raised before but not implemented. Secondly, Rob asks, you plan to overhaul BEE. Your plan, to overhaul BEE talks about what needs to be done to change the culture, but it gives a few specifics. What specific interventions do you have in mind? Would you abolish the legislation you say doesn't work, for example? And third, what is the role of tax policy and tax incentives, both in terms of attracting foreign capital, stimulating local enterprise and entrepreneurs?
Martin, can I have a go at that?
Sure.
First of all, just to indicate that what we have here is business position, which enables us to interact with government and share with labor and other social partners, giving them an indication and the strong confidence that we have that if we pursued this set of policies and set of strategies, we should be able to reposition the country. We are under no illusion that it is one out of several considerations or propositions that government has before it. But we're very pleased that it was well received by in the exchanges that we've had with government. That's not the same thing as that to suggest that they have accepted it, but it certainly constitutes a very important basis for a discussion as we reflect on how we navigate our way through this. We have urged our social partners that we do not have a great deal of time to move, and therefore we need to take urgent steps, and I think that there is an appreciation for that. You will note that there is a policy document that is being released by one of the political parties later on in the day today. Our position on Black economic empowerment underscores the efficacy of the strategy for Black economic empowerment as part of an agenda for inclusive growth. And it also appreciates that beyond Black economic empowerment, there are other key elements that would drive inclusive growth. They include increasing employment in the economy so that you have greater participation in the labor market. It also includes a focus on SMMEs. Clearly, notwithstanding the efficacy of the policy, there are shortcomings like any other, and in some instances, there are unintended consequences. For instance, we raise issues about a plethora of what we call the charters that sometimes, sector charters that sometimes conflict and contradict the main framing policy in the legislation, or sometimes contradict targets that are set by specific enterprises, whether these are state enterprises or government entities, etc., etc., etc. That creates a lot of problems, and some in business see it sometimes as shifting of goalposts. So what we're talking about here is that where the efficacy of the policy is tried, we need to ensure that it is capable of being delivered efficiently in the labor market. We also, in our exchanges with government, committed to tax morality, that business would play its part to encourage and promote conduct by business that ensures that we make our contribution. And by the way, we have a pact or an agreement with SARS through BUSA, where we commit to ensuring that we work with SARS to ensure that we play our part. Of course, part of the economic stimulation agenda must be to reflect on where opportunities exist for tax incentives to encourage and leverage participation and investment in targeted areas. And Martin can comment on on whether we've reflected on specifics in respect of these.
Okay, can I add? It's Sandile Zungu here. In our interactions with various formations in business, as a Black Business Council, we've been really very comforted in appreciating that none of the business formations, is skeptical of broad-based Black economic empowerment. Business as a whole, including the Black Business Council, quite honestly, are pleading for simplicity, for certainty, as well as predictability. There's a lot that can be achieved through the streamlining of the codes of good practice with the sector charters, which SIPO has eloquently described as a plethora of them. We sometimes talk against one another. So to the extent that we want to see a growing economy whose fruits are shared in inclusivity. And broad-based Black economic empowerment is one of the very potent tools in our arsenal to achieve that. So there is, without any shade of doubt, total commitment from business towards broad-based Black economic empowerment. In our search for a reconstructed future, none of the tools in our arsenal, and even beyond our own arsenal, are sacrosanct. They are subject to being scrutinized, and we do appreciate that.
Thank you. Busi, I believe you also want to add something to that question.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you very much, Tim. So maybe to just sharing some views and details around the specificity that is being required by Rob Rose. There is a collaboration between BLSA and the SASME Fund at the moment, but also I think when you look at the broad document, the 1,000-page document that has been produced by Business for South Africa, you will see that in the sectoral focus work, there is a specific focus and attention being given to BBBE and how the different sectors are actually going to ensure that there is a serious enhancement and a serious focus in as far as transformation and BBB is concerned. But from a BLSA and SASME Fund perspective, we have agreed as BLSA that all our member companies are actually going to be tabling to us how they are actually going to ensure that there is a deliberate and an intentional inclusion of Black SMMEs in particular, and what work are going to be done with those and what the impact of that work that is actually going to be done with as SMMEs is actually going to yield to. And the reason why we have actually made this engagement, and I think the president of the Black Business Council, Mr. Sandile Zungu, has articulated, we know and acknowledge that there is great importance for us as a country in an effort to change the economic trajectory, to ensure that we include the SMMEs, Black SMMEs in particular, because I guess let's agree, unless and until you have touched Black, in this country, then you are not going to move the dial. So I think there is going to be that specific focus from BLSA, but I think I'm just talking to BLSA, all member organizations are actually going to be having that specific focus. And we have taken this so seriously such that it is articulated in the revised strategy that the BLSA has actually just signed off this past Monday. So I think that specificity, I think in due course will definitely be shared and will ensure that we keep you as the media constituency updated in these initiatives going forward. Thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you, Busi. And I know, Cass, you also wanted to comment on the tax policy.
Yeah, Tom, very briefly. Rob, your question on the tax policy. I think SIPO did cover it, but let me just add that tax policy, incentives have got to be part of the tools that need to be used to attract investment and enable business growth in South Africa. And that's part of the package that we would want to look at. But I think we also need just two issues related to that. The one is in the funding of all of this, let's appreciate the fiscal problem we currently have, and that we need to manage all of this within the context of also improving our fiscal situation. So the tax incentives, tax policy needs to be targeted in areas that actually do enable investment and areas that actually do enable business growth. The second thing is that tax incentives and tax policy can only work on the back of a broad regulatory environment that actually enables attraction of investment and foreign investment, but also enables local businesses to actually invest. And that such policy environment needs to be consistent, and those are the decisions we need to take. We need to enable that policy environment on the back of which appropriate tax policy, including incentives and so on, can actually be the cherry on the pie, if you like. Thanks.
Thank you, Kaz. Let me move to a question from Terence Creamer. It says, please could you unpack the 3.4 trillion funding requirement further? Is this only for the infrastructure component of the plan? If so, what projects have been included and what is the funding gap once already approved SOE, fiscal transfer and PPP finance is factored in? Martin, could I ask you to pick up on that?
Yes, let me take that. Thank you very much indeed, Terence. So the answer is that of that 3.4 trillion, and we're happy to go through it with anybody who wants to in greater detail in due course, that's 2.4 trillion, rising to 2.4 trillion cumulative funding requirement in the public sector, including SOEs, by 22-23. Our modeling suggests another 1 trillion rand for the private sector, taking into consideration in particular the COVID-19 impact in terms of credit default and losses. There's obviously a major liquidity issue we need to consider in that context. So it does take into consideration SOEs, fiscal transfer, and those PPP finances that are already on balance sheet. We would add that there is in fact no such thing as off-balance sheet financing. It's going to be eventually, ultimately, on somebody's balance sheet. There will be recourse. For those of you that were participating in or attended in the Sustainable Infrastructure Development Symposium, it was clear that many of those projects are in a state of significant development, but where they are going to need to have either public sector or private sector support. They will be on the sovereign balance sheet ultimately. So those that are already identified are indeed included. That, of course, significantly increases the overall level of debt that is required, which is why I'd like to comment just briefly, if I may, Sipa refer to it, on our need as a country to access very substantial incremental amounts of foreign capital. We have estimated, and again, this information is available to you, that there's some $12 trillion worth of foreign capital available, not to South Africa, sadly, but to the world at large. And we're going to have to make our case along with everybody else. That's from private sector investment, both equity and debt, through to multilaterals, all the way through to the World Bank Group, including, of course, the IMF. Also mobilizing funding for transitional projects in terms of climate change, so ESG type of financing. But we do think that there's going to be very significant constraints, particularly, A, if we're going to access that funding on appropriate terms and conditions without compromising our sovereignty, and B, that the cost of that financing doesn't erode our ability to service our debt. As I said, we're very happy. There's much more detail that's up on the web already to go through this in greater detail in due course, Timothy.
Thank you very much, Martin. Those are the only questions we have at the moment. I understand we've got more than 50 people on the call, so if you do have a question, please could you type it into the question box so that we can deal with that now. Just a reminder, all of the documents that have been referred to are available on the Business for South Africa website, which you can download and study at your leisure. For now, there are no further questions, though I do have a question that's come directly to me via WhatsApp. Let me read that out and we can answer that. It's from Hilary Joffe, who asks if there was one thing that you could do. What's the most important thing of all of these proposals and initiatives? What is the one thing you feel that would make the biggest difference? Martin and Cass, perhaps you could answer that with the rest of the team coming in.
Well, I hope that we have the same one, but we might have different ones. So there is no one silver bullet, unfortunately, Hilary, if only there were. But what I would emphasize is that we know what the issues are. We need to ruthlessly prioritize. We need to work collaboratively hand in glove with our social partners. And there are many of those immediate steps that can be taken, which will demonstrate that actually actions do speak louder than words. So whether it is reforming the visa regime, or whether it is allocating spectrum, or whether it is opening up the fifth window for renewable projects, all of those have been on the stocks for a long time. We are, as a country, waiting for every single one of them to be enacted and implemented. I think that that would be what we have to do, and we have to do it, as I indicated, in the shortest possible time frame.
Can I also add to that? In our various interactions with social partners, whether it's at the level of NEDLEC or just talking to government directly, one thing that is very obvious, and it's probably a shared concern, is the lack of capacity and manifests itself in many ways. Length it takes to turn things around, length and the time it takes to just get legislative processes corrected to respond to the urgent challenges. So it's not a project, but we have to join forces to enhance the capacity at the level of the state. South Africa is endowed with a lot of plans, and therefore you'll see that what comes from us are plans that have emerged somewhere else before. We don't claim the monopoly of wisdom in terms of where we fail as a political economy is at the level of implementation. Like it or not, we have to face this called lack of capacity at the level of the state. So that's an issue that we have to single-mindedly tackle.
Can I have a go at that? My response to Hilary's question, I think I agree with Martin. There isn't a panacea, but certainly it is the case that if we were to reset our policy framework in the medium-term policy budget framework presentation in October, it would reset the economic trajectory of our country. So we have to single-mindedly reposition the agenda for public spending, reining in a great deal of that, and enabling our country to live for another day. So that, and we've said this to government, we've said this to our other social partners, that it is the most critical point. There's no need for us to be engaging each other in public and in an acrimonious fashion. We need to lock ourselves in a room somewhere and come to a framing medium-term strategic framework, if you like, that will guide what is said in that strategy. That will enable all of us as social partners to speak from the same hymn sheet with investors in terms of how we are seeing the trajectory of growth of our economy.
Thank you very much. We've got two further questions that have just come through. Carol Payton and Mariam Issa. The first is of the list of 12 immediate actions. It seems pretty similar to the list of structural reforms that have been on the agenda for some time and have not been acted upon. Do you think things will be different this time, and why? And there's a similar question from Mariam. Given that much of what you have proposed has been mooted before, what hope or indication do you have that your recommendations will be acted upon now? I want to ask Cass Guardia to answer those two, please.
Thanks, Carol and Miriam. I think we are absolutely cognizant of the fact that a lot of what is in the document is not new. And the reality is that it's not new because the issues we raise in the document are fundamental issues that have not been dealt with in many ways in the last few years, so the issues remain the same. I think what has changed, in some ways, COVID-19, the pandemic, tragic as it has been, has essentially created a situation where, while pre-COVID, we might have been at some sort of a crossroads where we had a number of choices. COVID has, within the context of the same issues, now created a situation where we're at a T-junction, and we have one of two choices to make. The wrong choice takes us towards a failed state. The correct choice puts us onto a long, hard road to economic recovery, to which we all need to contribute and to which we all need to show brave and consistent and mature leadership, every constituency in this country. And I think that's the difference. The difference is that we are no longer at the precipice. We've, to a certain extent, jumped, and we now need to begin to apply these things with urgency to open up some parachutes so that we have a softer landing than we would otherwise have had. And I think that's the difference. And so we recognize that there's nothing new here, but there isn't meant to be anything new here. I think we need to emphasize that these are issues that should have been addressed a long time ago. We now don't have any more choices, and we need to now get together to address them. So let me leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Cass. Busi, I know you also have a comment to make.
Thank you very much, Tim. And thanks to Carol and Miriam for their questions. And I think my colleagues, and I agree with them, have already said that, Carol, there isn't a silver bullet. But I think if we were to focus on anything, my view would be that let's focus on ensuring that we increase business confidence. Confidence sitting at 5% is disastrous, irrespective which way you choose to look at it. And I think my interest in confidence is that if we are clear that as a country, the biggest thing that we actually have to achieve is that of ensuring that we deal with the unemployment crisis that we have in this country, because in dealing with unemployment, you then, start dealing with poverty, and in dealing with poverty, you then start dealing with inequality. So if unemployment is the main target that we actually want to shift, you have to agree that you are not going to be able to get jobs if you don't have economic growth. And you also have to agree that we won't be able to achieve economic growth if we don't have investment. We won't be able to get investment unless and until there's business confidence. So whatever it is that needs to be done, and Martin in his presentation has already indicated what are some of the things that need to be focused on so that we can be able to increase business confidence. So business confidence, I think, is actually the main issue that needs to be addressed to be able to start changing the economic trajectory in this country. And I think the question around what is different now, in my mind, and Sandile Zungu alluded to this in his opening remarks, this crisis gives us an opportunity to probably maybe engage with some of these issues from a totally different lens. For the first time in our country, or maybe not for the first time, but for the first time in our democracy, we are facing a sovereign debt crisis in the next 3 years, as Minister Tito Mboweni articulated. For the first time in our democracy, we have been downgraded into junk status. For the first time in our democracy, we are considering going to the IMF to try and get funding. For the first time in our democracy, we could actually, be losing our economic sovereignty. For the first time in our country, in our democracy, we are looking at a GDP movement of negative 30%. Now, if all of these things are not black swans, if all of these things are not indicators that something is fundamentally wrong, and it requires all of us as social partners to start moving towards a particular direction, then I'm not sure what will. So in my mind, what is different now is precisely that we find ourselves deep in the precipice, and we're going to have to be fighting for survival. We have to ensure that whatever actions we take are going to be those that are going to ensure that the 59 million South Africans' lives and livelihoods are actually protected. And I think that is what is different. And I think these things that are different, therefore, warrant us, to start putting some seriousness into some of these things that we've been talking about, at least for the past 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Busi. And Khanki, I know you also want to add to that answer.
Thank you very much. It's Khanki Mataban from the Black Business Council. I think Isa and Hilary, what gives us more hope now is that the level of collaboration that we experienced during the COVID challenges has been actually positive. We have never seen this type of collaboration between all the social partners, government, labor, business, and community. Decision making has been extremely impressive. There have been consultations, but that consultation has not been the one that we've seen where it became like a consultation forever. There has been consultation, but it was followed by decisive action. So that gives us hope that things have changed and things are changing. The other issue I wanted to touch on is that if we want to change the trajectory of the economy, we really need to focus on SMMEs development. It has been proven all over the world that if you want to make a dent in unemployment, you really have to focus on the SMMEs. You'll see, I think, somewhere in our document that we were even raising the issue of payment of SMMEs on time and payment of SMMEs at all, because there's been a lot of commitments that have been made, but we just need to implement that commitment to ensure that SMMEs survive, because most of them don't have the balance sheet that some of the big businesses they have. We also, I think, on the auctioning of the spectrum, we also want to urge government, as part of opening the market for new entrants, is to license what is called the wholesale open access network, because we've been exposed that a majority of people could not even access education because of lack of access to ICT. And then if we license the one as we auction the spectrum, that will give access to the rural areas and far-fetched places to enable the kids there to also be able to attend classes and go to school at the same time. But I think the big issue that we think may also make a dent is implementation. We've been talking about various policies for some times in the 26 years of democracy. The one thing that is lacking, I think, is implementation and proper implementation and efficient implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Khanki. Carol Payton, you have two questions, and I think we're going to roll them into one. The first is businesses put a lot of work into solving the Eskom problem, but this seems to have stalled completely. Why is there no urgency in your view, and what can be done to get this going? And then secondly, she asks, the ANC has also released an economic growth plan today. It also focuses on infrastructure-led recovery, but has a different solution from where the funding should come from. suggesting a change to Regulation 28, what pension funds take on, that pension funds take on more debt, that the SARB make more resources available to DFIs. Martin, could you respond to those questions, please?
Yeah, let me do that. Thank you, Carol. So on Eskom, we have indeed put significant effort into Eskom, and it is public knowledge that we've engaged through the social partners at Eskom, at NEDLAC, to create effectively a compact on how we must deal with it. That compact has been agreed but not signed. In fact, I'm told it is anticipated to be signed the next time that we meet under the oversight of President Ramaphosa. Having said that, it is of grave concern to us that as a country we haven't collectively agreed to mobilize the resources that are committed to in the context of that compact, because that's the only way that we're going to be able to wrestle the Eskom issues to the ground, as we've said previously, in the context of a restructured electricity supply industry and broader energy sector. We can't do one without the other. I note that load shedding is again with us at the worst possible time when we are seeing the surge of COVID-19 and the onset of winter. So we will be once again raising this. We do it on a regular basis. There is absolute urgency. It's a critical issue. On the matter of the ANC document, I think that they must speak to it as they will when they announce it at noon today. There are many aspects of it, as you've indicated, that also focus on common themes, including a new forged social and economic compact, including infrastructure-led recovery, We do not support a change to Regulation 28. We've made that clear in the context of the suggestions, both with respect to Eskom and elsewhere. We believe that it compromises the fiduciary responsibilities and the mandates of trustees and pension funds. We think that it impairs the risk-adjusted return to those pension funds. What we have said is that we support the mobilization of capital from any source, provided that we don't in any way undermine the financial stability of South Africa, of which I have to say we are very proud. The same applies to the SARB making resources available to DFIs. We don't support that. We are absolutely aligned with the position that has been articulated by the governor of the South African Reserve Bank as to its remit and its scope of responsibility.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think if there are no more questions, which there don't seem to be, I will now hand over to Sipho and Sandile just to give a brief wrap of this presentation.
I'll be very brief before Sipho concludes. Thank you so much to the media for interest in what a unified business is proposing as a way forward. We are in a deep crisis. There's no better way of presenting it. We were in a crisis before COVID with a downgrade, with a recession. COVID has exacerbated this. We don't need, as a society, as social partners, any better motivation than what is. Numbers don't lie. Because of what is prospectively the contraction, loss of employment. We do hope that society will give impetus to the debate that we're putting out there. And we hope that government will respond in an affirmative way, as we have witnessed thus far, by the way. There is no more time for debate. There is all the time for urgent action. So decisiveness at the level of political leadership has got to be demonstrated. As business, as a social partner, we are united, and we want to work with other social partners to take this country forward in a manner that is inclusive, and that takes growth of the economy and places.
Is Sandile disconnected now? What's going on?
I'm done.
I think
Hi,
I'm
Tim.
afraid we lost you there for a moment. Sipho, perhaps if you could pick up.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, Julian and Tim, thank you very much for setting this up. And I think that it went very well. And thanks to the members of the media for responding so well. I guess one of the most important things about what we've put forward here is a very important shift in our engagement approach and strategy as business. And that shift is that we have tabled a comprehensive set of proposals of what we think would work, what would enable us to access the critical capital required to reposition our economy, and what kind of interventions would be required. We put this without assuming that we have exclusivity of capacity and knowledge, and we put this for everybody to understand where we're coming from, and we're ready to engage. And most of these are positions that are common amongst us as social partners, and we should find a way to move and move with speed. All we would urge is that, as Sandile has so eloquently pointed out, we will be ill-served by a collective leadership that enjoys grandstanding and pointing fingers at each other. The moment is upon us to act in unison, decisively, and face up to the painful challenges, the painful decisions that we're going to have to take that might impact us as various constituencies in different ways. But if it is a pain that is enabling us to reach the possibilities that this country holds, it will be a worthy pain. But if it is one that we take in order to avoid taking the difficult challenges of the immediate period, then we would be foolhardy as a social partner. So we are inviting everyone to join us in agreeing that we will follow this path, and we act with speed and urgency. The resources available in the markets internationally are not waiting for us. We should make sure that we're among those who take the first mover advantage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sipho. Thank you very much to all of the speakers and to members of the media who have joined us here today. If you do have any further questions, please contact Julian Gwilym. His details are on the bottom of the press release. And with that, I think that concludes our presentation for today. Thank you very much for your attention, and goodbye.